Hello class, this is Brother Wells. We're going to talk a little bit more about variables. We've brought up variables in past weeks and we've used them in some of our code. We're going to go in a little bit more depth on them today. Particularly, we're going to talk a little bit about variable types. We're going to go into a little bit more depth about declaring variables and initializing variables. So let's go ahead and get started by reminding you the keyword var is what we use to declare a variable, and var basically tells JavaScript that I'm going to give you a variable name and I want you to save a place in memory for me that I can put stuff in and get stuff out, and I'm going to reference that place in memory using the word color. It's important to remember that variable names are case sensitive, so if I put a capital C on color, then everywhere else in the code I would need to reference it with a capital C as well. Variable names cannot have spaces in them. You don't need to put quotations around variable names here. In fact, that would cause a problem if you did and would break the code. And we can declare multiple variables by just declaring var again. And now we have two variables available to us for use within our program. You can also declare variables or multiple variables on the same line by adding a comma in between them. And now we've in essence done the same thing, and we have four variables. And we could have done color and cost in the same line, or we could have done all four of these within the same var. It's important to note that at this point, because they have no values, we did not assign any value to these variables. They're undefined, and JavaScript really doesn't know what to do with them yet. It doesn't know what's going to be in them. These variable names don't tell JavaScript anything. They're just for our use so that we know what we're doing with those variables. And so they're at this point kind of just blank slates for us to do what we want, which brings up variable types. Now, based on the type that the variable is, JavaScript can do different things with them. It's important to keep your types organized and what's the word I'm looking for? It's important for you to just keep track of what types you have in your different variables and not mix types. It can give you unpredictable results. For example, if you have two strings, you cannot do multiplication on them. You know, the arithmetic functions won't work on two strings. So you can get into problems if you're trying to do mixed types in there. So keep your types straight, and you can tell JavaScript what type you want your variable to be by basically giving it a value. For example, we come down here, color, and we just say color equals red. Now JavaScript knows that this color variable is a string, and you can do string functions on that. Same with cost. If I come in here to cost equals 2.35, then JavaScript now knows that cost is a number. And likewise, I can come in here and say success equals true. And JavaScript now knows that success is going to be a Boolean. And as I use those variables throughout my code, it's going to be smart on my part to only use those variables in that way. So I would never come into cost and assign a string to it later on. That could cause problems. Oh, there's an error there. That's always got to be an equal sign. So cost equals 2.35. And that's how you assign a value. Now, another way that you can initialize a variable, which is what we call it when we give it its first value, and that kind of tells JavaScript what type it's going to be, is you can actually do that when you declare the variable. So up at the top we said color equals red. And now color has been initialized. JavaScript knows what kind of type it is, and you can do the same for our number here. And cost is now initialized as a number and has a default value, which is the very first value that it gets in the program. Some of you remember from my screencast last week that I used the default value at one point and kind of showed you a little bit how that how that worked. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a background again on variables, on variable types, what initializing a variable does in assigning a type to your variable, and I hope that helps get us a little bit more background on variables.